people who are in the audience. I appreciate it. I had a big shtick planned asking everybody sort of what they were excited about. 3, okay, perfect, and why they wanted to attend. So I already heard from this lovely lady in the front. She wants to learn about emissions with the supply chain. Maybe I could ask you too, sort of why you came? Oh, you're working here? Okay, so we'll go to the other person. Same interest, okay, learning about emissions across the supply chain. Are you with an oil and gas operator, or you're an operator? Oh, you're not an operator. Okay, perfect. Well, this talk is tailored to oil and gas operators, but that's okay. I think we'll still learn a ton around what the emissions requirements are for basically enabling LNG supply chain. So my talk is called Maintaining Global Competitiveness of African Energy Exports Through Demonstrating Emissions Reductions. And so what we're going to talk about today, basically, I hope by the end of this discussion, you will get a good overview of what are the sort of global forces at play, and then also come to the realization, or continue to come to the realization, that having emissions management in your operations, embedded in your operations, can actually be a competitive advantage. And I think we need to start the timer as well, too. Thank you. Okay, so this is just a disclosure, legal mumble jumbo, but if you read one thing in the fine text, you see that we are based in Calgary, Alberta, Canada. So why would a company that's based in Calgary, Alberta, Canada be here all the way to African Energy Week here in beautiful Cape Town? Well, the answer is that we are absolutely passionate about helping oil and gas companies understand their emissions profiles, reduce their emissions, to look at the long-term viability of the oil and gas sector. We're seeing huge amount of increased demand from the European Union in particular. There's lots of competitiveness in terms of energy exports as well too, particularly around the United States with their increasing domestic production and LNG export capacity. So in essence, this matters, and it matters now, and we need to ensure that we have companies actually understanding what the implications will be now and in the future to enable these global supply chains. So in essence, what I'm going to talk about and what I'm going to basically give you an overview of is 2027 is a really important date for African energy producers, as well as exporters of energy at any time, of any kind. And the reason for that is that we will require, or when I say we, I'm using the global sort of oil and gas ecosystem, will require MRV, which stands for Measurement, Reporting, and Verification of their emissions from an auditable perspective. So that means that we're going to have to move away from the traditional way that we report our emissions, which is basically just using generic emissions factors, and we're going to have to go to actual measurement. And so for African operators across the supply chain, this matters, and this matters now. 2027 is not very far away. So a little bit about me and a little bit about Highwood Emissions Management. So as our lovely and stylish host pointed out, my name is Jessica Shumlich. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Highwood. Highwood does one thing, and we do it really, really well. We help oil and gas companies understand their emissions, and we're absolutely passionate about ensuring that we have a sustainable future for our oil and gas industry across the globe. Okay, so why does this matter? And I think I'm going to continue to say the same point over and over again. So this matters now because no longer are we going to be able to do this from a voluntary perspective. We will require to do this. It is going to be mandatory in order to enable that market access, particularly into the European Union. And I'll talk about some other jurisdictions as well too, and how we can look at preparedness. But I just want to make sure that that's iterated. So why? First of all, there's risks associated with not understanding our emissions profiles. There's risks associated with not measuring them. So we're actually in a process of sort of understanding why and what all of these new regulatory requirements will be. But in essence, there could be potential cargo rejections. There could also be potential fines associated with high-intensity crude. I just, this morning, listened to an individual from McKinsey who has done an analysis on the emissions performance of oil and gas in Africa versus globally. The emissions, and I wish I could have changed my presentation, but anyway, I'll just give you the numbers here. The average emissions intensity of an African barrel of oil is around 104 kilograms of CO2 equivalent. Now, what is that for a global BOE per day? That number is around 52. So in essence, McKinsey is stating that African production is actually twice the intensity of a barrel of oil than produced sort of elsewhere globally. So this matters, and it matters now. We're also seeing that there are huge opportunities associated with companies that are managing their emissions well. I've spoken to many investment banks, large national banks, financiers of oil and gas products, and it matters. Banks are looking, and investors and financiers are looking to companies who are able to demonstrate their emissions performance. And then lastly, it brings trust. It brings trust for all of those individuals who are involved in the supply chain, all of those end users of the oil and gas products as well too, as we look to export. Okay, so let's just talk a little bit about the global demand. So where are we seeing a demand for low carbon intensity oil and gas? The answer is we're seeing market forces globally who are demanding this. I'm going to spend more time on the European Union methane emissions regulation, only because it's the most developed. And when I say most developed, it's there, but it doesn't exactly give a lot of details around what the actual implications, but I'm going to do my best to sort of explain what we know and how to ensure that I'm passing on that knowledge to you. We're also seeing a lot of demand increase in the Asia-Pacific market for low carbon intensity oil and gas. That's particularly sort of being started by JobMec, which is sort of joint Korean and Japan organization that has come together, a government organization that has come together and said, we want to make sure that what we're importing into our country, those are huge energy purchasers, what we're bringing into our country has low carbon intensity. We're also seeing a huge increase in LNG export in the US market, which means that there's a lot of additional competition, particularly into the European market. So African companies are competing for market access with the increased LNG demand also out of the States. Of course, I'm not going to talk specifically about Russia. That's the only time I'm going to mention it, but we know sort of what's going on there and why it's important for African countries to take advantage, or companies to take advantage of these opportunities. So currently, Africa supplies about 20% of the EU gas imports. That number for the US right now is around 45%. So even just if you look at the jurisdictional difference, and if you look at the reserve difference between Africa and the US, there should be more export coming from Africa, and this is one of the ways that we can help enable that. So there's a competitive advantage that's actually associated with emissions reductions. So, and understanding your emissions profile. We've seen a lot of oil and gas companies that operate internationally and also operate in the continent of Africa have these really stringent emissions reductions, emissions measurement, and we're seeing local and indigenous and national oil and gas companies also adopt this. So, yeah. In essence, understanding your emissions profiles, reporting, disclosing them is not only important from a market access perspective, but also from a perspective of ensuring that there's future market. Okay, so let's jump into the dirty details. I'm sorry for this very busy slide, but the EU methane emissions regulation, EU whatever mumbo jumbo numbers, I'm just going to call it EU MER. So this is a new regulation that has been implemented by the European Commission, and it basically states that in the 2027 timeframe, as I said earlier, companies have to understand, report, measure, verify from an auditable perspective what their emissions are. All right, so what does this actually look like in terms of time? So again, like I said, the regulation was released in 2024. It became official in 2025. And this is the one that really matters. By 2027, January 1, 2027, companies need to be able to report their emissions. They need to measure, report, and verify from an auditable perspective. This is net new for oil and gas companies globally. In no other jurisdiction have we seen these stringent of regulations. And again, like I said, it's not just the domestic operators that are operating in Europe that have to comply with this. It's the actual operators who are supplying into that market. So if you're a producer, or if you exist anywhere along the supply chain, if you're an exporter, if you're an importer, this is important. I'm going to provide a bunch of other small details, but in essence, that 2027 number is really what you're looking at. And then furthermore, into 2028 and then into 2030, there's going to be actual intensity targets that are set. And by 2030, we'll see likely additional fees that will be in place if the intensity of the product that is being imported is not meeting some of those thresholds. So the other word that I'm going to use here, which I haven't defined yet, and you see, is OGMP. Now, OGMP stands for the Oil and Gas Methane Partnership. It's a United Nations initiative that has approximately 185 signatories. All of the big players have signed on, you know, the ENI, the Shell, the Repsol, the Exxon, all of these operators have signed on, and we're starting to see more and more commitments from national oil companies as well as indigenous companies. So OGMP, like I said, UN initiative, but why does it matter in the context of emissions, and why does it matter in the context of reporting into Europe? It matters because there are 3 ways to comply with the European Union methane emissions regulation. Pathway 1, basically, as an operator who is operating in Africa, you can say, okay, I'm going to be as stringent as an operator who's operating in continental Europe. Those are extremely, extremely strict, and I don't think any operators outside of Europe really are complying with those regulations right now, or to that level. The second is they say that you can commit to OGMP, and you can do OGMP, which again is a framework from the UN that basically states you have to measure your emissions and report your emissions. Now, where OGMP falls short of the European Union regulations is they don't require an audit, but the European Union methane emissions regulation requires an audit. So the second pathway is that you can do OGMP, you can measure your emissions, you can reconcile your emissions, I'll give you a definition of what reconciliation is here in a minute, but then you have to be able to audit it. And that's a brand new thing that is really going to be causing a lot of challenge, I think, for operators, and it's coming. So again, I defined OGMP. So I just wanted to give you a little bit of an overview of what is the difference between OGMP and then between the methane regulations. I'm going to define all of these words. So the first thing, let's talk about materiality. So what does materiality mean? Materiality means if you have all of your emissions, which are the actual sites or operating assets or even sort of into component level specifics on your sites, what are the actual material emissions? So say, for example, we might have one teeny little single well production facility that has virtually no equipment. That site probably is not going to be material when it comes to sort of your broader overview of your total emissions profiles. So OGMP allows you to do a materiality assessment, and then it says you only have to measure your material assets. That's different with the European Union methane regulation, is they require a measurement of every single asset, no matter the materiality. Okay, that's the first. The second one is around reconciliation. And so OGMP, what is reconciliation? Reconciliation is, in essence, doing the most complicated data stitching exercise of your emissions data to bring it together to develop what we call a methane measurement-informed inventory. Okay, so you might have a bunch of engineering estimates of your emissions. You might have a bunch of emissions factors that you use. Maybe you did a drone campaign, or maybe you've got some satellite data that you're using in order to measure your emissions. What reconciliation is bringing in all of that messy data, putting it together, and sort of developing out the most credible emissions numbers that you possibly can. It's extremely messy. Think about, a quilt that has 100 different types of patterns and stitches. That's basically what reconciliation is. And of course, different in OGMP versus the European Union methane emissions regulation. Verification, we already talked about verification, so there requires a third-party reasonable assurance to the ISO standards of what your emissions profiles are under the European Union system. Same thing with transparency. So with OGMP, you can submit your report to the United Nations, to UNEP, and they keep it confidential. There'll be more transparency required in the European Union. And then lastly, just around how do we actually do this? Honestly, doing the actual accounting of this, there's a ton of things that we're sort of learning about, and I think there's a lot of guidance that is still going to be developed. Okay, so I'm talking about 3 different parts of the supply chain. I'm talking about importers. So the importers are the ones who are actually implicated by this regulation. So what that means is that anyone who's importing LNG into Europe, they're the ones who will be responsible with complying. But what that means is that they're just going to pass the buck, right? So they're going to say then to their importers, hey, you're the ones now who have to ensure that you know your emissions profiles. And then, of course, the importers are going to say, okay, well, I'm going to pass the buck continually down the supply chain until you eventually get to production. So I've been asking a few folks on whether or not they're seeing emissions clauses in some of their contracts, and the answer is mixed. So some are starting to see them, and some aren't. But I think the trend is clear. That is going to become more and more common as we start to renegotiate these contracts into the longer term. Okay, I'm going to skip some of this. Okay, so what's actually required? What's actually required are a variety of different things in order to comply with the European Union methane emissions regulation. So the first one is what we call a bottom-up inventory. So basically what that means is you have a understanding of all of your equipment, you understand how much gas is going through it, you understand if it's being combusted or if it's being vented. You put all of that data together, and that's called a bottom-up inventory. And then the second one is top-down emissions estimates. And what is a top-down emissions estimate? That's basically some sort of aerial technology that flies over your facilities to measure your emissions. So that can be a drone, that can be a satellite, that can be an aircraft, something along those lines. Reconciliation is also required. We all know what reconciliation is now, right? Wonderful, wonderful. And then you also have to demonstrate improvement, and you have to set targets. And then again, I'm going to stress this auditable requirement. I think there's actually going to be a huge gap. There's a few students in the audience, actually. Hi. If you guys want to get into a good career, I would suggest becoming an auditor of emissions data, because we're going to need them so much for all of these new regulations. But it's actually really, really, really complex to do all of this. And I hope that that's sort of a message that you're starting to understand. The data is bad or wrong. Everything's, beautifully wrong, right? Everything's beautifully inconsistent. There's a ton of manual process that's going on right now that leads to human error. We're also learning a lot. I've been doing emissions for, I want to say, 20 years in oil and gas, and never have I seen in the past year to 2 years so much change and so much research and so much new understanding of where our emissions are coming from. There was a report that was published in the Permian Basin, which is a basin in Texas and New Mexico in the US, that said that reported emissions from oil and gas companies in the Permian Basin were underreported by 10 times. Think about that number, 10 times. And that's not because oil and gas companies are being nefarious by any means. It's just because we don't understand how to do this and how to do this well. All right, so in essence, traditional methods of reporting don't work anymore. What we used to do in the past is no longer going to serve us in the future. We're doing spreadsheets, we're trying to put data together, we're doing, potentially some sort of measurement, but we're not actually even using the using the data. So the point is, we need to start looking at this, and we need to start looking at it now. Africa is a specific example as well, too, in terms of why, this continent is different than, other sort of potential operating areas. First of all, the market access that Africa has to the European Union, the opportunity to increase the exports in the continent of Africa into Europe is phenomenal. So we want to be able to take advantage of that. So what do we want to do? We want to make sure that we have scalable systems. We want to make sure that we're developing this in a really robust way so that this can enable more. Operators have so many things that they have to do, and this is just one more thing that's coming on the plate. And so we need to come up with practical solutions for ensuring that when this inevitably comes down the pipeline in 2027, Jan 1, 2027, that we're prepared for it. So what did we do? So I'm going to switch a little bit to Highwood and sort of why we are in love with this problem and why it matters to us. Basically, what we said back in 2024 is we said, we see this problem coming. We want to help operators solve this problem. So we stood up a steering committee with some of the leading oil and gas companies, and we said, let's solve this problem together. How do we solve it? Eventually, we came up with a software solution that we've developed called the Emissions Intelligence Platform, and we launched that in January of this year. So what we're doing at Highwood is built for operators, with operators, completely from the beginning. So like I said, EIP, or Emissions Intelligence Platform, helps operators understand their emissions and bring together all of that data so that we can ensure that this is one thing that we can do, and we can do it right. So I'm going to sort of, I have a few more people here now in the audience, which is really exciting. So I'm going to kind of go off script now. A bunch of you, I think, missed this in the beginning, but I just kind of asked the question as why are you here? Why did you decide to come to this talk? So I heard a little bit about just wanting to get better understanding of emissions. Is there anything else that you came here for, that you want to ask, or that you are curious about?
Hello, ma'am. I'm a student at CPUT, and I'm doing my final year in mechanical engineering. So I'm just curious about everything because I'm about to go to the industry. I'm not sure what's happening there, and I want to see what's happening so that I will be able to know which way to go, which one I think I like the most more than the other. And also, like, I just arrived now, and I heard that you were talking about the solution of the problem, but unfortunately, I don't know what the problem was. So can you please tell me about what was the problem that you were talking about?
Yeah, okay, what is the problem? So in essence, the problem is that we want to understand our emissions profiles for a variety of different reasons. So you want to understand emissions first from sort of a global societal perspective is emissions cause global warming. They cause extreme weather events, they cause climate change. And so we want to reduce our emissions to sort of help our planet. The second one is there are increasing amounts of jurisdictions, like I said, particularly in Europe currently, but we're seeing global market forces change as well, that require you to really understand where your emissions are coming from, because understanding is first. I actually use this analogy, and maybe it's a bad analogy, but I'll tell you it anyway. If you want to lose weight, you do have to get on a scale, and you have to eat healthy and exercise and do everything. So you have to measure, and you have to reduce your weight. And so what we are doing is helping companies actually understand how much they weigh so that they can effectively reduce. And thirdly, and maybe most importantly, from an individual company perspective, losing methane is actually causing loss of money. So the methane that we lose through our pipes means that we can't sell it. And it means if we can't sell it, then, and it's just disappearing into the air, then we're having less actual financial goals or achieving our financial goals. So yeah, I hope that answers your question. Does anybody else have any other questions?
Hello, my name's Arno Tron. I'm from Tech House. I've just got a question. It seems like you are very focused on the data side of things, which is great. But do you help the operators with technical solutions to what they've got at the moment? And then do you take it further into developing of new projects as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So we could, I guess one of the things that I didn't say is Highwood Emissions. I'm trying not to make this a sales pitch, but thank you for the question. So Highwood is a consulting firm and a software firm. So on the consulting side of the business, we can look at all of the data and we can make technology recommendations for emissions reduction projects. Absolutely. But yeah, we are very focused on the data because we are trying to focus on the problem that we see and the problem that we're really, really good at. And so we don't tend to do a lot of work in sort of the EPC side of things or new project development, that kind of thing. We're really focused on helping existing assets understand their emissions and develop plans to reduce them.
Thank you so much. I understand you capture the data of how much mass emissions are emitted, but how do investors ensure or verify the data that's collected?
Yeah, absolutely. So our software system has like 700 pages of technical documentation on how we do the emissions calculations. And so the auditors are able to go into the system and actually do the audit based on that. We're also in the process of developing out a bunch of MRV frameworks. So MRV, again, monitoring reporting and verification. And so an auditor needs an actual MRV framework in order to audit against. Well, that doesn't exactly exist right now. And so our company is actually working with the European Commission with a variety of different standard organizations, including the ISOs, to develop out what those measurement audit frameworks are so that we can enable that.
Thank you. I'm Stembi So from Petroleum Agents South Africa. We are responsible to regulate the industry in South Africa. Are you working with any regulators on the emissions management? Thank you.
Absolutely. Not in Africa, so I'm going to come and talk with you afterwards. But so we're based in Calgary. We work with the Alberta Energy Regulator. We work with the Gas Commission in Saskatchewan, and we work with the British Columbia Oil and Gas Commission. We also work with the EPA, Environmental Protection Agency in the U.S., as well as CDPHE, which is the Colorado Department of Health and Environment, something or other. Don't quote me on that, but. So yeah, we are working in many jurisdictions, also with the European Commission as well, in terms of those regulations. So lots of work with regulators, yeah.
Thank you so much, Jessica.
Yeah, I think I'm out of time. So thank you for the opportunity, and I'll stick around. I would love to chat with anybody who wants to have a conversation.
Thank you. Round of applause.